Many years ago I wrote a ZX81 game called Caverns. I never quite finished it on the ZX81, so in my last video I started rewriting it using a ZX81 emulator in Z80 assembler. I ran out of time after 3 days and all I got it to do was load the menu screens. As a backer of the Spectrum Next second release, I was curious to see if this was a platform I could port it to. I was interested to see if the .p file I had created in the ZX81 emulator would run on the Next, but this might take a year or so to arrive. So I turned to the CSpect emulator, which emulates the Next, to see if it would run on there. CSpect is downloaded from the Daily Blogspot website, so I downloaded it and tried to run it. I got an error saying I needed OpenAL, so I went to the OpenAL website and downloaded and installed this. When I ran the emulator, it didn't look like the Next menu I'd seen, but rather like a basic Spectrum opening screen. I didn't have a Spectrum, but this was my guess. What I had to do next was to download the Next SD image file and put this in my CSpect folder. I extracted this using 7-zip and retrieved two files, ENNextZX-ROM and ENNextMMC-ROM, that also need to go in the CSpect root folder. The image file needs to be referenced when you run the emulator, so I created a Windows shortcut with the image file included in the parameters. How to specify the parameters described in the CSpect README file. Now I was able to run the emulator in Next mode and browse for the folders in the image and play some of the games. There was a folder for ZX81 games and my game would need to go in there. I couldn't figure out how to put my game in the image file, but eventually got an old SD card and burnt the image onto this using the Win32 Disk Imager program. I could now drop my game onto the SD card and recreate a new image file using the Win32 Disk Imager program, which I could reference in my Windows shortcut to run the emulator. This took quite some time, and I later learned I could have created a virtual SD card which presumably can be used much more quickly. Now I could attempt to run my ZX81.p file in ZX81 mode. Did it work? No. All I got was a black screen. But I'd had an interest in even setting up the Next emulator, learning by mistakes, and now I could tinker with this until the Next turns up, and I can then try my ZX81 program on the real thing.